Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva. Janmadhyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat. Tene brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsurayah. Tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatratra sargo mrisha. Dhamna svena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the Supreme Being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation made of three gunas appears in him as though real, like water in a mirage. Being eternally self effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion Maya of the material world. We meditate upon him, the Supreme Being. Nigamakalpataror galitam phalam shukamukadamritadrava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahmarishi. Go on drinking this nectar day after day. So now we are entering the 11th chapter. Maitreya is describing the process of subcreation to Vidura. We saw in the last chapter how Maitreya described the tenfold creation, including the three levels of creation by Brahma, which are the immobile creatures, the mobile animals, and the humans, and then the last category being the heavenly or celestial beings of supernatural powers and all that. Then he goes on to describe time. He mentioned that now I will describe time. He has described space and the various beings, and now there is the description of time and Manvantaras in this chapter. And it's a very beautifully technical chapter, which is so subtle and similar in its inquiry to current physics. So, this goes to show the level of sophistication that is found in Bhagavatam and in the perception of the rishis, even into matter. So, Maitreya begins by saying that the minutest particle of matter, which cannot be divided any further, is called Paramanu. So, this is the most elemental particle he is referring to. In fact, when the word atom was used, when they discovered the atom in the last century, the word atom literally means that which cannot be divided. But later it was found that the atom is not the most fundamental particle, and then there were particles found such as electrons, neutrons, and protons, and now we have found even more elemental particles, and this search goes on. What Bhagavatam declares here is the most fundamental particle beyond which it cannot be divided is called Paramanu, or the we can roughly translate it as the supreme atom. And then Maitreya says that the whole universe is made of these supreme atoms or paramanus, which compose the entire undifferentiated whole universe, and each of these remain in an unspecified state. So it's very nicely describing that the supreme atom at the individual level has no state of its own. It is only through combination that the mind creates the illusory notion of objects. So, this is again very beautifully consistent with quantum physics, that it's only due to the observer that matter is perceived. And Maitreya here also says that the combination of the supreme atoms creates in the mind of men the illusory notion of a unit or a substance or any aspect of matter. Then he also goes on to say that time now is measured by space. So it's a very beautiful idea again, which is now discovered, that space and time are essentially one continuum, and this was revealed in Bhagavatam millennia before, where he says that the measure of time is the time taken by sun to travel the smallest particle. So the most elemental measure of time is the time taken by light to travel the smallest particle or the most fundamental particle. So it's a very beautiful way to describe time in terms of space. And then Maitreya goes into a very beautifully technical description of different units of time, starting from microseconds, literally, all the way to 10 to the power 20 or many billions of seconds. So, the most fundamental time he gives is what's called as Truti, and Truti is in microseconds. And then he gives the next level of unit called as Veda, and Veda is 100 Trutis, which is in milliseconds. And then three Vedas forms a lava, and then three lavas forms a nimesha, he says. So when we come to the unit called nimesha, it's half a second, and it literally means twinkling of an eye. So that's why in many languages, and even the English word minute comes from the root nimesha. It's wrongly used for 60 seconds, or it's anyway currently used for 60 seconds in all Indian languages as well as in English. But here, the technical definition of nimesha is half a second. It comes from the root nimi, which is the eyelid, and the time it takes for the blinking of an eyelid is half a second. So, starting from microseconds to milliseconds to then fraction of a second, and now coming up to half a second is nimesha, and then three nimeshas are a kshana, which is one moment, it said, or it's 1.5 seconds. And then from there, there is a unit called kashta, and then kashta leads up to laghu. So kashta is 5 moments or approximately 7 seconds, and then from there we go up to laghu, which is about 15 kashtas or approximately 100 seconds or 1.5 minutes. And thereby slowly he gives such a beautiful mathematical progression leading up to what's called nadi or nadika, which is 15 laghus, and nadika is approximately 20 minutes or somewhere close to that. It is to be very precise, nadika comes to about 30 minutes, and then two nadikas are considered one muhurta, which is 1 hour. In some texts, it's referred to as 24 minutes, which means one muhurta becomes 48 minutes. So it's in the range of 48 to 60 minutes. And then one prahara is 3 hours. And then one day is the half day and half night, which is essentially 8 praharas. So, like this, Bhagavatam beautifully gives a description of time starting from microseconds all the way up to the 24-hour day. And then it goes on to build by saying 15 days and 15 nights form a month, which is marked by the bright and dark halves of the month. So, the waxing and the waning phase of the month in terms of the moon's relative position forms the two halves of the month. And then it says that 2 months forms a season, because in the Vedic system there are 6 seasons, and therefore 2 months forms a season. The 6 seasons are starting from spring, then summer, then monsoon, which is a unique season in Bharat, which is the season where there are rains, and then after monsoon there is autumn, and then there is the two winter seasons. So essentially there are 6 seasons, and each is 2 months long. And then there is something called ayana, which is 6 months. So there is uttarayana and dakshinayana. When the sun moves in the northerly direction, that's 6 months. And when the sun moves in the southerly direction, that's 6 months. So January to July approximately is Uttarayana, or the sun's northerly movement, and July through January is the sun's southerly movement, or Dakshinayana. And then he says that this whole thing becomes 1 year when the combine the two movements of the sun, or the 6 seasons of the year, or the 12 months. And in all these ways, 1 year is formed, and the year has different names based on how we calculate the year. There is the word called Samvatsara, which is based on the calculation of the sun's movement. There is the word called Parivatsara, which is based on the movement of Jupiter. There is the word called Anuvatsara, which is based on the movement of the moon. So there are so many different ways in which year is calculated, and it's seen even today that different regions of Bharat, for instance, have New Year cycle calculated differently, because some follow the lunar calendar, some follow the solar calendar, and so on. So all of these are described so perfectly. What is amazing here is the rishis not only inquired within, recognizing the source as the supreme being, all pervading as the one and only being, but also all his expressions were within the purview of inquiry. So, this is why a very rich civilization is able to inquire both within and without. So, they were able to inquire into the nature of matter and come up with all these various metrics in terms of the most elemental particle and so on. Of course, their inquiry was based more on intuitive, meditative understanding rather than using a laboratory and so on. And yet, the amazing thing is, this intuitive measurements map very nicely to the current sophisticated measurements, and the time measurements, as we can see, are very sophisticated, starting from microseconds all the way up to, we will see, billions of years. So right now we are at the level of 1 year. We started at microseconds, which is Truti, and from there we came up to seconds, and then minutes, which is Muhurta, and then month, and then year. And then he goes on to say that these measures, when we make 100 years, 100 years is considered the average lifespan of humans. So we went from 1 year to 100 years. And then he says that the yugas, which is, there are four yugas. There are Krita Yuga or Satya Yuga, then Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. We have seen this before too. They are in descending order. Satya Yuga is 4 times longer. Treta, standing for number 3, is 3 times. Dwapara, standing for 2, is 2 times. And Kali Yuga is 1. So they are in the ratio of 4, 3, 2, 1 into 1000 years each. And therefore, Satya Yuga is 4000, Treta Yuga is 3000, Dwapara is 2000, and Kali is 1000. And they have a Sandhya period which is corresponding to that. And so totally it adds up to 12,000 years, the four cycle of yugas. There are some who say that the 12,000 years corresponds to celestial years, and therefore it corresponds to millions of human years. And there are some who say that it's 12,000 human years. Be that as it may, it's still a long time. And then it is said that this cycle of four yugas, which corresponds to 12,000 years or 12,000 celestial years, itself repeats for 1,000 times to form what is called as 1 day of Brahma. So before that, it is also mentioned that Dharma descends in these yugas. We have seen that too. In Satya Yuga, Dharma has 4 limbs. That is, all the 4 virtues are there. In the Satya Yuga, it is comprised of penance, purity, compassion, and truthfulness. In Treta Yuga, there is only purity, compassion, and truthfulness. Penance goes away. In Dwapara Yuga, penance and purity both go away, and compassion and truth alone remain. And in Kali Yuga, only truth remains, and even that is shaky now. So, that being said, he moves on to say that there are 1000 revolutions of the four yugas, which comprise one day of Brahma, which is called as one kalpa. So, one kalpa corresponds to 1000 into 4 or 4000 yugas, and we can see that each cycle is 12,000 years or 12,000 celestial years, depending on how one looks at it, and therefore 1000 revolutions of that is a huge number, and then that forms one day of Brahma, and it is said that that one day of Brahma is called one kalpa, and one night of Brahma is the dissolution after the kalpa. So every day of Brahma corresponds to half a day, which is 1000 cycles of four yugas when there is creation, and then half a day, half the night, which is half the day, which is the night time of Brahma, which corresponds to dissolution, where everything is absorbed back, and then the next day, as it were, everything comes forth. So we can see how, just as in the microcosm, where in our day, during the day, we everything comes forth when our mind wakes up, and in the night everything goes and gets absorbed into the causal state of sleep. So at a macro level, it is said that Brahma's day is one kalpa each, which is 1000 cycles of four yugas, and that corresponds to already something like a very large amount of time. It corresponds to around something like 10 power 14 seconds or something like that. It's a huge number. It corresponds to billions of years. And then it is said that there are different Manvantaras, and each Manvantara is headed by one Manu, which is the name that we say that corresponds to the word man. And so one kalpa has 14 manvantaras. So approximately each manu presides over 71 cycles of four yugas, and thereby in the day of Brahma there are 14 manus, and then in the night of Manu everything is in the night of Brahma everything is dissolved, and then the next day again there is the creation by Brahma of the, and then the cycle of 1000 cycles of four yugas, and then again it dissolves. So this is all a very technical description going leading up to say that the entire life of Brahma is also considered to be 100 years of Brahma. So as we can see, one day of Brahma corresponds to 1000 cycles of four yugas, and 100 years of that corresponds to a humongous number, something like 155 trillion years or something like that. So before that, so after this, after 100 years of Brahma's life, everything gets resolved back into the Supreme Being. So what it is said here is there is a progression starting from microseconds to seconds all the way to year, and then 100 years, which is human life, and then leading up to yuga, which is thousands of years, and then leading up to kalpa, which is millions of years, and then leading up to finally the entire lifespan of Brahma, which is trillions of years. And after these trillions of years, it is said that Brahma himself is absorbed back. We see Brahma coming forth from the cosmic being at the beginning of the entire cycle, which is called as Parardha. And after the Parardha is over, when Brahma himself is absorbed back, all that remains is the Supreme Being after the trillion year cycle. So the most important point with all this is that it goes to show the practically infinite nature of time, because it is literally infinite, because first of all the time scale we are talking of is trillions of years, and even after that what it is said is there is only the dissolution into the Supreme Being Sri Hari, and then after that it again comes forth for the next trillion year cycle. So we are looking at this vast, humongous, incomprehensible time scale, and the purpose of this, at a very practical level is to show the insignificance of our own petty lifespan. So when we look at our life, just as in space we are so tiny, when we look at even the picture of a NASA telescope showing where Earth is, and we see that it is such a small dot in even one portion of the galaxy being pictured, and there are so many galaxies. Similarly, even with time, the time we occupy on this earth is infinitesimally small compared to the infinite nature of time. So we are looking at trillion year cycle, trillions of years cycle, and then it gets absorbed back and then it comes forth again. So this cycle goes to show that the universe is infinite both in space and time, and it goes on forever. So one of the amazing things here is, again, being very consistent with science, it doesn't posit any beginning of time or any beginning of the world, end of the world. It only posits a cycle, and this is very consistent again with where physics is now, that time is infinite, space is infinite, and there is cycles of creation with no beginning and no end, and there is a cyclical nature to everything, just as seasons are cyclical, years are cyclical, yugas are cyclical, kalpas are cyclical, and so therefore everything is, the entire time scale called Parardha is also cyclical. So it's all going in circle at a very massive level, only to show that again everything is insignificant in terms of our own time scale and all the things that we seem to be attached to. The eternal supreme being manifesting as even the cosmic intelligence or the Mahat is manifesting at such a incomprehensible infinite scale that boggles the mind. And of course, at the unmanifest level, there is no time and space at all, being pure awareness. And therefore, if we recognize that at the manifest level we are so tiny and infinitesimal, and at the unmanifest level all there is only the supreme being, then that gives us also in a different way what is called as vairagya or detachment from all the petty concerns. One last thing this chapter says is also the name of the current kalpa. The current kalpa is called as Shvetavaraha kalpa because it is the kalpa in which Sri Hari took the form of a boar or Varaha. So the whole avatar, starting with Varaha, happens in this kalpa, and it presumably happened in previous kalpas too. But in this kalpa, he specifically, because started with the Varaha, it appears that the order differs. So even though normally Matsya is considered the first avatar, but here in Bhagavatam, Varaha, the boar avatar, is given first, and that's why this kalpa is called as Varaha kalpa. And the Manvantara we are in is also called, the name for the Manvantara and the previous Manvantara will come later. And finally, what Maitreya says here is to Vidura, he says, therefore you can see that this universe is literally billions of miles wide in space and trillions of years in time, and yet the supreme being, so he brings it back to the source by saying the supreme being who is the cause of all causes and in whom all this happens is the most ancient being called as Vishnu, or the all pervading supreme being. So, all of this infinite scales of space and time and the cyclical nature, all of it abides in or has as its substrate the supreme being who is unaffected by anything, in whom this projection of time and space comes and goes. So he says the last verse of this chapter is Tadahur Aksharam Brahma Sarva Karana Karanam Vishnur Dhama Param Sakshat Purushasya Mahatmanah. So that which is called as the indestructible Brahman, Aksharam Brahma, is the cause of all causes, Sarva Karana Karanam, and it is the abode of Vishnu, Vishnur Dhama Param, the supreme abode of Vishnu, Sakshat Purushasya Mahatmanah, who is the most ancient being and the supreme spirit of all, the self of all beings. So that's the essence finally, is that the whole scale of time and space described in this chapter first is to point out the infinite nature of time and the tiny nature of our own lifespan, and also that the whole infinite nature of time and space inheres in the Supreme Being, who is the source of all sources or cause of all causes and the Supreme Self of all. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.